So, anybody taking vacations this summer? Anybody going to be doing that? Got big plans? Awesome. All right, how about you want to take a vacation, but you just can't? Liars. Y'all are going to do something. Come on. You going somewhere. You're going to shoot your bow or something. I'm just saying. But here's the thing. When you go on vacation, there's always prep. There's always prep work. You got to figure out what you're going to pack and how, where you're going to stay when you get there and how much it's going to cost and what you need to take, as far as clothing and, your food and how many people are coming and the toys for your kids, whatever. But in order to prepare, we love to be prepared. We love to be prepared for what is coming. But it helps to know where you're going in order to know how to prepare. Am I right? Like it depends on whether you're going to the mountains or you're going to the beach as to how you prepare for that. And it puts you at ease. Like that helps. It's like, okay, so I know what's coming, and so therefore I can prepare. The problem is when it comes to living our lives, life doesn't always make it that easy. It's not always that easy to figure out where it is you're actually headed. We try to plan. We try to figure out what the future is going to hold and what direction we're going, and we do our best, but life just throws us a curveball sometimes. And it kind of throws us off course, and it gives us a little anxiety and, makes us worried and just uncomfortable, and I don't know, and then we're stressed and anxious and frustrated, and it just helps to know where we're wanting to go, but it just is so difficult. And so it's this kind of in-between, this season, this sort of weird in-between waiting period, whether it's good or bad. This is what we're really talking about in this series, and this is kind of the question that we're posing, very kind of 10,000-foot view here. What are you waiting for? And the reason I highlighted the word "for" is because that's really the word we stress when we try to answer that question. We answer that question like, well, I know what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting on things to get better. I'm waiting for things to settle down. I'm waiting for the economy to kind of get fixed. I don't want to do this. In order for me to know what to do, I need to know kind of, where it is I'm going. I need to know how things are going to pan out. I need to catch a break. I need for the house to sell. I need to get the job. I need for some things to settle down before I can know what it is I need to do. But for those of us who are Christians, and this is why we're talking about this, for those of us who are Christians, we should look at this question differently. In other words, we tend to answer this question in terms of trying to make our circumstances kind of go the way we want them to see them kind of come to fruition, when the truth is, when we answer this question as Christians, this should be read more in terms of like how we would respond to our circumstances that we're currently in. That's a big difference. In other words, I think we should ask this question this way, and this is the way we talked about it last week. If God is with me, even in the waiting, whether that's like positive or negative kind of waiting, then what am I waiting for? In other words, not what am I waiting for, like the stuff that I want to see happen, the desires and the wants and my hopes and dreams need to happen. Instead, what am I waiting for now? Like, isn't there some whistling while we're waiting? Whistle while we work. Isn't there something I should be doing now, not just kind of sitting back and, I hope things work out, but some activity that should be happening in the midst of the waiting. And that's what I want us to see. For Christians, the critical question looks like this. Will I respond? Will I respond to my circumstances as someone who is confident that God is with them? Will I choose to do this? Because this is a choice. We're driving this question through the life of a man named Joseph. It's found all the way back, and we started last week. We're going to do this for the next couple of weeks, so this week and next week. And we're really just kind of, again, broad view, but his story really takes up a big chunk of the Old Testament, really. A lot of the narrative found in Genesis, it concerns this man named Joseph, because this was such a crucial moment in Israel's history, but there's also something that really we can learn about the way that he handled the waiting, because he had a lot of waiting, as we talked about last week. And we said that at a very young age, 17 years old, he gets sold. He really his brothers tried to kill him, and then they were like, maybe we should rethink this. They decided instead to show him a little mercy and sold him into slavery. And so he finds himself a slave in another country, separated from his family, not knowing how long this was going to last or what this next season was going to look like. And we're talking years and years and years, decades would go by. But he didn't know that at the time. But the way that he responded to his circumstances was so unique. It was so surprising, really. If you read the story with fresh eyes, as if you've never read it before, it's pretty phenomenal how he is described as handling his situation. And really everything that he did, he handled as if somebody was in his shoes or in his situation that really was confident and believed that God was with him. That was really what separated him and made this so unique. And so we find him, we left off last week with really kind of things looked like it had turned the corner because he found himself not just a slave, but he was a slave in one of kind of the higher ups' homes. He was a captain of the guard. His name was Potiphar. And it looked like things were getting better because Potiphar had actually given him a real sign of honor and trust by, kind of looking at who he was and his character. And it's like, I'm just kind of going to turn over the keys to you. You're going to kind of be in charge of my household and everything I own. I mean, this was a big step. But then things kind of go from not so good to like really bad for Joseph. Because Potiphar's wife sort of had her eye on him. And if this is the part we didn't really, it's kind of like that segue narrative. And it's like, why did this have to happen? And he finds himself really having to make a decision that was really going to be a lose-lose. Like there was really not a good scenario for him and when it came to his position and his future. And so she's kind of throwing herself at him and he's resisting her at every turn. It's like, no, I can't do that. Matter of fact, she's wanting him to sleep with her. And his response is, no way. I mean, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? How could I do that? I mean, here's a 20-something-year-old young man who's apparently fairly good looking. And yet he is choosing to make this really difficult decision and choosing to kind of walk his own path and remain faithful to his God. Somebody who didn't really know a thing about theology, didn't have a Bible to read. He didn't have the book of wisdom and all the Proverbs to know like, oh, don't do this or do this. Like he didn't have any of that, but he really didn't know a whole lot about this God that he served. And yet, for some reason, Joseph chose to remain faithful to God because, this is the only reason that makes sense, because he was really confident that God was with him. Didn't know everything about him, but he just knew, hey, God is with me, even in the midst of this, and so I'm going to choose to walk differently. Well, of course, Potiphar's wife didn't like that. It's like, no way you're going to deny me, young man. I mean, come on, you a Hebrew slave. Like, why are you saying no to me? And so she comes up with this story that she makes up. She grabs his cloak one day and like she's trying to pursue him and he runs off and she grabs his cloak, if you know the story, and he takes off out of the house. And then she comes up with this story that she tells her husband later. And it's like, Joseph, your servant, that guy, why did you have him in our home? Because he tried to rape me. And I said, no means no, Joseph. And he ran off and I grabbed his cloak and isn't this terrible? And he was, of course, very upset and mad. He believed his wife and he ends up throwing Joseph in prison. It's like, dude, when are you going to catch a break? Because it's like Joseph, I mean, here he is. He gets thrown into the dungeon, as the word goes, thrown into prison for the very thing that he had the self-control not to do. It's unbelievable. It's like, wow, like why? Like, when is this guy going to catch a break? Well, that's really what I want us to see today, because Joseph finally does have the moment come along when he catches a break, and things begin to go well for him. And this is really what I want us to see, because this is important. I want us to see that there is not just Joseph choosing to do something amazing and wonderful and trust that God is with him when there's great need, but also in this moment of blessing and prosperity in his life, he continued to be who he was. And I think this is actually what we're going to be seeing today. There's actually a more critical question for us, I believe, as North American Christians. For those of us who live in the United States, what we don't understand, I think, is that we have great blessing and freedom and wealth and prosperity more than we even realize. And it's like, no, this doesn't apply to me. We're kind of paycheck to paycheck. But the truth is, we are wealthier by international standards. I mean, if you have any kind of savings account at all, if you've ever saved for anything, Well, I just saved up a little money away, some of my allowance. If you had allowance growing up, I'm telling you, by international standards, you're wealthy. You have prosperity. And it's that makes it difficult. This is the question I think that's really important for us today. How does somebody with so much blessing and opportunity live their life day by day as if God is with them? In a season where it looks like we're kind of coming out of the waiting and things are getting better, like how do we do it? Here's why I ask, because this is why I think this is so important, because you and I all know that it's not need and poverty as much as wealth, prosperity, and blessing that cause us the temptation to walk away from faith and God. It's prosperity and blessing that really that's typically the driving force that causes us to kind of push away, because it's like when there is great need, when we have a lot of need, we don't mind praying. But when we have everything we need, we tend not to pray. We just typically put faith on reserve when that happens. And so what was it about Joseph? Because Joseph somehow, when he was faced with this golden opportunity moment, he does something different. He chooses to make some different decisions that I think we can all learn from. And so we find out that one day, Joseph is 30 years old now. So, this has been like 13 years. And he's still a slave, but now he's been in prison for no telling how many years. And one day, the Pharaoh himself, the king of Egypt, has a couple of dreams. That's what's recorded for us. And the dreams are kind of weird, but they were disturbing. And he first dreams, this is just like all in the same night. He dreams that, there's these 7 fat, healthy cows grazing along the Nile River, and they get swallowed up and consumed and eaten by these 7 sickly, gaunt cows that walk up. And then he wakes up and then he goes back to sleep and he has another dream that's equally as strange. There's, 7 healthy heads of grain that get consumed or swallowed up by 7 unhealthy, sickly heads of grain and, that are scorched by the east wind. And it's this weird description. And then he wakes up and he doesn't understand. It's like, what's going on? And he's very disturbed. And this is where we pick up. In chapter 41, in the morning, Pharaoh, his mind was troubled. That would be disturbing if you actually remembered a dream like that. So he sent for, I don't know that you and I would do this nowadays, but this was their understanding. He sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. It's like there must be something to this. Well, then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings." Now, if you remember how the story goes, when Joseph ended up in prison, there were a couple of guys that were with him for a period of time, and one of them was the cupbearer to the king. And it's like he all of a sudden remembers that, oh yeah, there was this guy, this Hebrew guy that I shared a cell with, years ago. And we were both in jail together, and I had a dream and he interpreted it. And what was crazy is everything that he told me actually came to pass. It was unbelievable. I'm just telling you, I think he may be your guy. I just forgot about him. I got out and I forgot about him. And now it's been years, but I needed to let you know this. Well, so, of course, that sounded good. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. And when he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. The most powerful man in the known world at the time. Here was the moment. This is that moment of opportunity. This is that moment when things could turn around, and he's faced with a decision. It's like, oh my goodness, I now have an audience with somebody who nobody gets an audience with, somebody who really the only person in the known world who has the power to alter or change my situation. And he's approaching me. He has called me, and Pharaoh says to Joseph, "I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. You've got the goods. You've got the talent, young man. You've got all the potential in the world. And I want to give you, just imagine this in our context. I want to give you an incredible opportunity. This is a once-in-a-lifetime deal. And it's going to expire in about 5 minutes. And so I want you to make a decision right now. I need you to sign the papers. In our context, maybe it's signing the papers. It's jumping into that partnership. It's, saying yes to an opportunity. It's the transfer. It's the promotion. It's whatever it is. It's that deal of a lifetime, that is that kind of golden ticket that could literally change your situation and take you out of the mess and turn the dial on, how things have been going in your life up to this point. And so you just know that right now, you need to focus in, you need to play the game, you need to do whatever it takes to be able to say yes to this scenario, to this circumstance, to this deal, to this opportunity, because there's such potential and I don't want to miss it. Because if I miss it, then everything's going to change for me and I'll miss this opportunity and it just won't look good and it's not the direction that I want to go. And so, here's the thing. Let me just ask you this. What is it about us that in those moments, because we're all faced with those, either we know exactly what I'm talking about, or it's going to come at some point in our lives in some form or fashion. There's going to be a moment when it's like, oh, this is the moment. And there's going to be something in us that tempts us to just, suddenly become a little different. What is that in us? What is that in us that causes us to think, I don't know. This is too big a deal. I kind of want to take my God and I want to take faith and I sort of want to leave it at the door for just this meeting. And then we suddenly find ourselves compromising on things we just thought we would never do, thought we would never think about, let alone never do. Things that, compromise our ethics, our ethical standards, our morality. The way that we live our lives, we just suddenly things that we never thought we would do. Now we're considering it's because, I'm a Christian and, God is with me and I don't know, but I just feel like this is too important. It's like we assume, God, I need to handle this because this is too big a deal. I don't want to bring faith into this because it might mess things up. That's kind of how we do. And so what do? How do we avoid the temptation, or how do we overcome that kind of temptation? And what did Joseph do? Well, here's what Joseph did. In that moment, here he is. He's standing face to face, or as close as he could be, as this, slave guy that's been in prison for the last many years, and he's never met him, and he's standing before the most powerful man in the world. And what did Joseph do? Joseph responded in this moment just like anybody would respond in his position, who was confident that God was with him. That's what Joseph does. It's like, really? Well, what did that look like? And Joseph responds. He's like, I heard you can do this. That's what Pharaoh says. And his response is, well, I can't. I can't do it. Oh, but God. But God can. Hold up. Whoa. Joseph, surely there were people in the room that were thinking, oh, my goodness, he's going to die, like right now. He's going to die. We're about to watch. Do you have the mop bucket? Because we're about to clean up the blood splatters because things aren't pretty. He literally just gets called in and he's addressing, the man with all the authority and the power in the known world. And he says, I can't do it, but Pharaoh, who believed at the time that he was divine, and yet he says, but you aren't able to interpret it, neither is anybody else, but I'm just telling you that God can. He didn't even say my God. He just says God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. And surely everybody was thinking that he just ruined it. He took his golden opportunity and he has flushed it, because don't you know that this is a professional environment? You don't talk about God in the palace. This is a business matter. This is a partnership. This is a business deal. This isn't professional. This isn't, this is corporate America. This is not how you behave. You don't bring God into the situation. This is about your talent and your ability and your potential and your financial, situation. You need to be able to just sign the dotted line, and you can talk about God later if you want. What are you talking about? And not only that, but he says, he just doesn't even check up. He says the reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in two forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God. I'm just going to keep on talking about God, and God will do it soon. This is going to happen. I'm just telling you, like, and everybody's got to be thinking, this is crazy talk. I can't believe he's really doing this. You have fleshed it. It's over. You have sealed the deal. Your fate, you're going back to jail, and you're just going to spend time there. I cannot believe, like, whatever you say at this point surely won't matter because you're saying it's a God thing. Like, really? So unprofessional. How do you not know better, young Hebrew boy? I can't believe this. And then, to make it even worse, let's just pour a little salt on an open wound. He not only answers, and because then he goes ahead and he interprets the dreams. Here's what he says. So the 7 good, cows and the 7 good, heads of grain, they represent 7 good years that are coming, full of abundance and prosperity. But then they're going to be eaten up and swallowed immediately after that by 7 years of incredible destructive famine. And you're going to forget that there was even years of abundance altogether. And so it's like, that's what the dreams mean. And he doesn't stop there. He then begins, you ready for this? This is so crazy. He then begins, without being asked, to give Pharaoh advice on how to handle it for the country. The boldness. And he's like, and now let me just tell you what to do, Pharaoh. Look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. I'm just thinking this is what you ought to do. And let Pharaoh, guys, you taking notes? Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest. I'm just spitballing here, of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. And they should collect all the food the food of the good years and that are coming, and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities, for food, for later. And this food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. Y'all got all that? Anything? Do I need to repeat anything? You got your notes? You write all that down, guys? And it's like, are you kidding me? You've answered what he actually asked you to do. You came up with some, God answer about interpreting these dreams. But now you're telling me that you're just going to stand here in front of Pharaoh and give him the advice on how to run the country? Seriously? Surely, why would he do that? Why would he be so bold? Well, I'm just telling you again, the only thing that makes sense is because Joseph was just responding how anybody would respond who was in his position, and also believed and was confident that God was with him. That's what Joseph was doing. It's the only thing that adds up. Otherwise, you're crazy. And sure enough, it sounded good. The plan seemed good. It sounded like a good idea to Pharaoh and all his officials. And so Pharaoh asked them, well, guys, can we find anyone like this guy? One in whom the Spirit of God lives. One in whom is the Spirit of God. And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made he's talking to him, since God has made all of this known to you, he doesn't even say your God, he just goes with it. Since God has made all this known to you, there is no more discerning. There is no one so discerning and wise as you. There's nobody better for the job. It's like, hold up. What's he about to do? Surely everybody's like, hush tones. It's like, hold up. This is not what I was expecting. You shall be in charge. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people will submit to your orders, and only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Are you kidding me? Okay. Come on. He's known Joseph now for like 23 and a half minutes. Who has been displaced. He's not a native. He's a Hebrew slave who's been imprisoned, accused of something like rape, and has been stuck in prison for the last however many years, and has never had an audience with the king of Egypt. Didn't even know who he was. And here, just a few minutes later, upon having met the king of Egypt, there is this moment where the Pharaoh just says, well, I would sure hate for this to happen and me not take your advice. And so, because this sounds like a big deal. And so if it is true, I'm just going to be smart about this. I think I'll just put you in charge of it, because if it comes true, well, Degum, then you are You are certainly the most discerning and wise man I've ever met, and so I think you ought to be in charge of it. Are you serious? Like, what in the world? And of course, we read that and it's like, come on, that's silly, that's stupid. Like, that's thousands of years. Nobody in today's world, like, that doesn't happen. I mean, can this happen? Can this happen? I'm like, seriously? Something so profound? Like, no, there's legal systems, there's laws, there's hoops you have to jump through. That can't happen. That's ridiculous. Guess what? I think it can. Why? Because when men and women who have faith in God, when they use their gifts and their talents and their abilities and their opportunities and their potential and their resources, when they leverage those for something other than themselves, when they involve God in that moment, when they leverage those things, honestly believing that I am doing this as if God is really with me, when that happens, God's doors are wide open to be able to do unbelievable things in our lives. I believe that 100%. Does it make it easy to know how to respond and how to navigate? Yeah, when we're going through tough times, it's like, yeah, we'll approach God in that scenario. But what about when things are rocking? What about when things are good? That's when it gets a little more difficult. Am I right? Am I right? I mean, you can nod your head on that one because the answer is absolutely. Like, it's difficult. So, I think there's a couple of things that he did that made this maybe a little bit easier. Not just the precedent that he had set while he was in great need, while the circumstances were awful. But I think he just made some decisions that set him up for this. And then he ends up, and this is kind of how the summary, Joseph was 30 years old when this happened. 30 years old. When he entered the service of the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. It's unbelievable. How in the world? Like, how did this happen to him? Because the easiest answer, because Joseph really just was responding to his circumstance, whether it was great need and poverty or great blessing and wealth, he was responding as if he really believed that God was with him. So, what does that look like for you and me? Because here's the thing, I recognize that there are some of you in here, maybe watching online, and you feel like, this probably doesn't actually apply to me, because like wealth, prosperity, blessing, literally words I've never used to describe myself. Anybody? Does anybody feel that way? When the truth is, we're missing something. I think we've got an unhealthy perspective of just how prosperous and blessed we are just to live here with great, incredible opportunity. And so we've just lost some perspective. So initially, we've just got to get our perspective right. Here's why this matters so much. Because if we don't, when we find ourselves with a moment like this, when things could just turn around, when there's that moment, if we've not lived as if God is really with us in great times of need, then we certainly won't leverage it in great times of prosperity and opportunity. And here's why. And you all know this is true. It's because the test of blessing and prosperity is passed by far fewer people than the test of want and need. Isn't that true? We fail that test all the time, especially as North American Christians. We fail the test. All of us, to some degree at some point in our lives, because we don't even recognize that we are blessed and prosperous and wealthy and have great opportunity and freedom in our midst. And so then we just don't pass the test because we don't even recognize it. We don't even see it. And yet, even when we do, we just kind of want to, I just want to kind of leave God and faith at the door because it's so unprofessional. That's just not what you do. I reserve that for small group and Sunday mornings. Like, that's when you do that. But in my business, that's just pray at home, but, somewhere else, I just don't know. And you know it's true. I mean, there far fewer people, far fewer people are able to pass the test of prosperity than in those moments of opportunity than people that are able to pass that test when things aren't going well, because we pray when we have need. We don't mind talking about God. I mean, you'll talk about God when somebody's sick. You know, when you need a job, when there's a job loss or the finances aren't going real good. You don't mind talking about God. You'll involve God in those scenarios. When things aren't going good, we talk about God, but then when things begin to turn around and there's blessing, it's just kind of like, I don't recognize the need anymore. It just doesn't seem right. And so here's a couple of things that I think Joseph did that set him up for success. There's two things, and I think they're fairly practical. Practical helps sometimes. I discovered this last week, that as I got home later, a couple of days into the week, my son Aaron, I have twin 10-year-old boys, and one of them, his name's Aaron, and he's, some of you may have seen this posted on Facebook today, but he just, has some anxiety issues about like being alone, going to the other side of the house. It's kind of crazy fear, but it's sure enough, like it's fear. Like it's like, Ben, will you go with me to the other side of the house so I can get clothes for my shower? It's like, seriously. And it seems crazy, but it's like real for him. And yet he came to me because they sit in here and listen, and you just never know. He's 10. He's a 10-year-old boy. Like, is he really listening? And yet he comes to his mommy. He comes to my wife and says, you know what? Big smile on his face. I was able to go to the other side because Daddy taught me this week that God is with me all the time, even when I'm scared. He was so excited. He didn't tell anybody this until after the fact. It was unbelievable. And here's the thing, because it can be practical. Like, there is a practical application to this, or it really doesn't do us a whole lot of good. Doesn't do us any good to just kind of lock it in up here. And I memorized this, and I know this, and I've walked through, and I know all the scripts. Like, that doesn't do us any good. That's as good as paint in a bucket. It doesn't do any good until it's actually applied to a wall. And that's the way it is with this. So here's a couple of practical thoughts. First of all, I think Joseph did this. He went public with his dependence, and that's what we need to do. Like, and you can add to that quickly. ASAP. As soon as possible. Go public. Here's what I mean by that. It needs to be abundantly clear. Like when and here, I'm specifically talking about in these moments, these opportunities where there is great potential, there's abundance, it looks like it could turn around, it looks like that deal could go through, things are going to get better, things are going to improve. So many people don't mind approaching God when they're at the bottom, when things aren't going well, but then as they're moving up the chain, the ladder of success, or when they've actually already gotten there, it's like God is kind of a distant thought. And I don't want us to fail that test, the test of prosperity. Instead, as quickly as you can, when you feel like that moment is upon you, there is an opportunity in front of you. Any kind of opportunity. It can be a weekly opportunity for things to improve and get better, whatever it is. Go public with your dependence. Here's a thought. Here's an idea. At the beginning of your week, during a staff meeting, or maybe during an interview, maybe that new job interview or that transfer might be coming up, or hey, I might get that promotion, or here's an opportunity, here's a deal. Before you sign those papers, before you meet with that partner, what if, as a Christian, you just pause and say, can I just take just a second? Can we just pray before we start this? Hold up. No, that's so unprofessional. You don't do that. That's so not. Here's the thing. Here's a test for you. If that makes you cringe, the thought of that, that's so not professional. I so would never do that. That's just not appropriate. You just don't do that in my industry, in my world. Nobody would do that. If that makes you cringe, then you have future problems ahead of you when it comes to your faith. You just will. Because if that is a problem, to just in that moment, to intentionally choose to live in that moment of opportunity as if God is really with you. And the best way to do that is just to go ahead and offer it up and just say, and it doesn't have to be a prayer, whatever style fits you, whatever's appropriate for you. Just in that moment to just let kind of the room know that my dependence is on a heavenly Father. As much as, I'm in this and I think it's my potential and I'm so good and I've done all the right things and I'm bringing money to the table and things are about to be awesome and I'm a rock star, as much as all that may be in the cards, for you to then say in that moment, somehow in your way that's appropriate, for you to just let them know, hey, this is a God thing. I'm just making sure you understand. And I'm not saying you have to be the guy who puts a fish symbol in your logo. That's not what I'm suggesting. But maybe. But it doesn't have to be that. Just how can you go public with your dependence as quickly as possible on the front end of success? Okay? Joseph did that right out of the gate. First words out of his mouth. Well, I can't, Pharaoh, but God. That was a game changer. Could have wrecked it for him. Sent right back to jail. Go sit down, my friend. Don't act like there's a God that's greater than me. And yet he just said, I just want you to know up front, this is about God, not me. Then, and this is what he did. We'll talk really more about this next week. Leverage what God has given you for others. As you read through his story, what you find, and again, we're going to kind of go there next week, what you find is that there's never a time that's recorded in Joseph's life, and all of these 14 long chapters, this narrative about Joseph's life, you don't find anywhere where he leverages his power and his influence and his wealth for himself. It's always leveraged for somebody else. It's always an opportunity. What if Christians began to do this? As you begin to climb that ladder of success, as you've arrived there, I'm getting debt paid off, I'm getting bill, I'm putting away I'm going to get a boat, I'm going to say, what if on the front end of that, you just made the decision, you sat down with your family, because some of you are thinking, that's just not me, I'm just not even there. I'm just telling you, if you've ever saved for anything, you are wealthy. You've had more opportunity than a large majority of the world to even be able to think that way. Oh yeah, I'm going to save some water for tomorrow. That is foreign to a large portion of the world, even still today. And so you need to stop thinking that way. You have great wealth and great opportunity. And so what if you began to leverage it not just for you? Here's why this is so important. Because God did not bless you because of you or for you. If you're a Christian, that needs to be your mantra. That's got to be in the cards for you, into kind of your everyday ethic and how you go about your day, because that is true of you. That's what we believe. That when God blesses you with something, it's not just so that you can drive around in a Cadillac. That's awesome. But that's where the whole prosperity gospel and all of that has gotten way off. Because there's so many people, it's well, God has, he has called to bless me and to prosper me, and if I do this and if I'm faithful, then he's going to give. It's hold up, you have missed part of this. He may bless you, but not for you. He's blessing you. He's creating opportunity for you, not so that you can then use it for yourself. It's for you to be able to bless others. That is always in Scripture. Here's why I know that. Not just because of how Joseph chose to leverage his opportunity, but because that's what we see exampled in the life of Jesus. That's what's so beautiful about the story of Jesus. And this wasn't about being the number 2 man in Egypt. This is about being God of the universe. Somebody who had the perfect position of authority and power, and all of it at his disposal and rightly his, deservedly his, and yet he chose to set it aside. And as he walked this earth over and over, what you see again throughout the Gospels is Jesus praying to a heavenly Father, saying, I just want you to see that I'm dependent. It's whoa. Didn't you say you're the Messiah? That you are the bread of life? That you are the Son of Man, the Son of God? That you are the creator of the world? You were there at the beginning and you're here now. Isn't that who you are? Yes. I'm giving you an example of what it looks like to express constant dependence on your Heavenly Father. And then he leveraged it. He leveraged all of his position, his authority, and his power for the sake of you and me. That's bizarre, even to the point of death. I'm going to give everything I've got for you. Now, maybe you're not a follower of Jesus. Maybe you're not a Christian. You've never really made that decision. It's like, I've kind of... Let me ask you this. Who else are you going to follow? If not Jesus. Because to make the decision not to follow Jesus is to make the decision to follow somebody else. Something or somebody else. And so what or who are you choosing to follow? If not Jesus. It seems to me that there's really not a better alternative. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, I'm not buying it. Like that's one thing. But to believe that it's a possibility and then not to follow him, that's kind of crazy. Because if he is who he says he is, then he's worth following. Because the God of the universe gave himself for you. He leveraged everything he had. All of his opportunity and his blessing. I mean, he had it all. And he set it aside for you and me. That's worth following.